Sometimes the most profound moments begin with the simplest acts of kindness. In the rugged foothills of Colorado, where mountain trails wind through ancient pines and the air carries the promise of winter, Cal Porter was just trying to clear his head when he heard the cry. A former firefighter with weathered hands and a heart still healing from loss, he'd taken to these solitary hikes as his way of making sense of single fatherhood and starting over. The young girl trapped beneath the fallen aspen was someone else's daughter, but in that moment she became his responsibility. He didn't think about reward or recognition as he stabilized her broken leg with branches and his flannel shirt, didn't consider consequences as he carried her down the treacherous path. He simply did what needed doing. But what happens when that simple act of heroism collides with a world of wealth beyond imagination? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The morning sun painted the Colorado landscape in shades of amber and gold, casting long shadows across the valley where Millbrook nestled between rolling hills and the distant peaks of the Rockies. It was the kind of small town where neighbors still waved from their porches, where the local diner served coffee strong enough to wake the dead, and where everyone knew your business, whether you wanted them to or not. Cal Porter stood at the kitchen window of his modest rental house, watching steam rise from his coffee mug as his 8-year-old son Jake scarfed down pancakes at the scarred wooden table behind him. The boy's enthusiasm for breakfast was one of the few constants in their world these days, a bright spot in the careful routine they'd built together over the past 2 years. "Dad, Mrs. Henderson says there's going to be snow on the mountain peaks this weekend," Jake announced between bites, syrup sticky on his chin. "Can we go hiking? You promised we'd explore that new trail before it gets too cold." Cal turned from the window, noting how his son's eyes lit up at the mention of adventure. At 8, Jake possessed an irrepressible curiosity about the world, a quality that both delighted and terrified his father. The boy had inherited his mother's fearless spirit, and that thought brought the familiar tightness to Cal's chest. "We'll see, buddy," Cal said, settling into the chair across from Jake. "Depends on the weather and whether you get your homework done without me having to remind you 17 times. Jake grinned, revealing the gap where his front tooth used to be. "I only forgot twice yesterday." "Progress," Cal acknowledged with a wry smile. The house around them bore the signs of 2 bachelors learning to navigate domestic life together. It wasn't much. 3 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that had seen better decades, but it was theirs. Cal had chosen it specifically for its proximity to the elementary school and the hiking trails that crisscrossed the surrounding foothills. After the suffocating months in his brother's guest room following Sarah's death, even this simple rental felt like a palace of independence. Cal's phone buzzed against the table, displaying a text from his supervisor at the hardware store where he worked. Another employee had called in sick, which meant another long day of lifting heavy supplies and answering questions about home improvement projects he'd never attempted himself. It wasn't the career he'd planned. Nothing about his current life resembled the future he'd envisioned when he'd been a lieutenant with the Denver Fire Department. But it paid the bills and kept food on the table. "Gotta run, Jake," he said, draining the last of his coffee. "Mrs. Patterson will be here in 20 minutes to walk you to school. Can't I just walk by myself? I'm 8 now." "8's not 28, sport. Rules are rules." Jake's expression suggested he found this particular rule unreasonable, but he'd learned not to push too hard. Both Porter men had developed an instinct for recognizing when flexibility ended and immovable boundaries began. Cal grabbed his work jacket from the hook by the door, pausing to ruffle Jake's hair. "Be good for Mrs. Patterson. And remember, homework. And first, then video games, and call if there's any emergency," Jake recited with the practiced ease of repetition. "That's my boy." The drive to Miller's Hardware took Cal through the heart of Millbrook, past the courthouse with its weathered brick facade, the library where Jake spent rainy afternoons, and Rosie's Diner, where half the town gathered for coffee and gossip each morning. Cal had fallen into the rhythm of this place more easily than he'd expected. After the constant urgency of emergency response work, there was something soothing about the measured pace of small-town life. At the hardware store, Cal found his boss, Tom Miller, already wrestling with a shipment of lumber in the back lot. "Tom," was 63, built like a fire hydrant, and possessed the kind of practical wisdom that came from 40 years of helping people fix things that were broken. "Morning, Cal. Thanks for coming in early. Jerry's got the flu, and we've got contractors. Coming in all day for supplies?" "No problem." Cal grabbed a pair of work gloves from his back pocket. "Where do you want to start?" The morning flew by in a blur of inventory and customer service. Cal found genuine satisfaction in helping folks solve their problems, whether it was matching paint colors for a kitchen renovation or explaining the difference between wood screws and drywall anchors. There was something honest about the work that appealed to him. People came in with broken things, and he helped them find ways to make those things whole again. During his lunch break, Cal walked the 3 blocks to Jake's school, a tradition he'd maintained since they'd moved to Millbrook. He liked to watch his son emerge from the red brick building, backpack bouncing, usually in animated conversation with whatever friend had captured his attention that day. It was one of those small parental pleasures that helped Cal remember why all the other struggles were worth enduring. Today, Jake burst through the school doors with unusual excitement, practically vibrating with energy as he spotted his father waiting by the flagpole. "Dad! Dad, guess what happened in Mrs. Thompson's class today?" "Let me guess," Cal said, falling into step beside his son as they headed toward home. "You discovered a new species of mathematics." "No, silly. Though I did get my multiplication test back and I got a 92. Jake's pride was unmistakable. "But that's not the best part. We're doing a project about community helpers, and I picked firefighters. And Mrs. Thompson said I should interview someone who actually fought fires, and I said I knew the best one in the whole world." Cal felt his chest tighten. He'd been careful about sharing details of his previous career with Jake, not wanting to burden the boy with stories of danger and loss. But he'd also tried to be honest about why they'd left Denver and started over in Millbrook. "That sounds like a great project, buddy. What do you need to know?" "Everything." Jake's enthusiasm was infectious, despite Cal's reservations. "Like, what was the scariest fire you ever fought? And did you ever save anyone's life? And why did you decide to stop being a firefighter?" The last question hit Cal like a physical blow. How do you explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes saving other people's lives comes at the cost of being unable to save the one that mattered most? How do you describe the weight of survivor's guilt, the way it can crush your sense of purpose until even the career you love becomes a daily reminder of your failure? "Tell you what," Cal said, buying himself time. "How about we work on that project this weekend? I'll answer all your questions, and maybe we can even visit the fire station here in town. Chief Morrison's a good man. He might let you see the trucks up close." Jake's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? That would be so cool. Wait till I tell Tommy and Marcus." They'd reached home, and Cal watched his son bound up the front steps with renewed energy. Through the living room window, Cal could see Mrs. Patterson, their elderly neighbor who served as Jake's after-school babysitter, settling into her favorite chair with a cup of tea and her crossword puzzle. The woman was a godsend. Patient, kind, and possessed of the sort of old-fashioned wisdom that seemed to be vanishing from the world. "Afternoon, Mrs. Patterson," Cal called as they entered. "How was our boy today?" "Good as gold, as always," she replied, though her knowing smile suggested Jake hadn't been quite as angelic as advertised. Though he did try to convince me that his homework assignment was to watch cartoons for educational purposes. "Is that so?" Cal raised an eyebrow at his son, who had the grace to look slightly sheepish. "It was worth a try," Jake said with a shrug that was far too sophisticated for his 8 years. "Homework first," Cal reminded him. "I'll be back by 6 with dinner." The afternoon at the hardware store passed quietly, giving Cal time to think about Jake's project and the questions it would inevitably raise. He'd known this day would come, the day when his son would want to understand more about the man his father had been before their world had changed forever. Cal had hoped to have more time to prepare, to find the right words, to explain choices that sometimes felt inexplicable, even to himself. As closing time approached, Cal began the familiar routine of securing the store, counting down the register, and preparing for another evening of single parenthood. It was a life that had become comfortable in its predictability, safe in its limitations. Cal had convinced himself that contentment was enough, that asking for more was both selfish and dangerous. He was locking the front door when he noticed the black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows making it impossible to see inside. Something about the vehicle struck him as out of place in Millbrook, where most folks drove pickup trucks or sensible sedans. But then Mrs. Kowalski's grandson was visiting from Denver, and young people seemed to favor flashier transportation. These days, Cal dismissed the thought and headed home to Jake, unaware that in less than 48 hours, that same sense of something being out of place would prove to be prophetic in ways he couldn't possibly imagine. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of crystalline clarity that made the Colorado mountains look close enough to touch. Cal stood on his back porch, breathing in air so clean it seemed to cleanse something deep in his lungs, while Jake bounced around the kitchen behind him, barely containing his excitement about their planned hike. "Dad, did you pack the first aid kit?" Jake called through the screen door. "And the water? And the trail mix? And did you remember to charge the GPS?" Cal smiled at his son's methodical approach to adventure preparation. At 8, Jake had already developed the kind of systematic thinking that would serve him well in life. "All packed, buddy. You ready to hit the trail?" The drive to the trailhead took them through some of the most beautiful country Cal had ever seen. The aspen trees were just beginning their autumn transformation, splashing the mountainsides with brilliant gold that seemed to glow against the dark green of the evergreens. Jake pressed his face to the passenger window, pointing out wildlife and asking questions about everything, from tree identification to weather patterns. They parked at the small gravel lot that marked the beginning of the Cascade Falls Trail, a moderate 3-mile hike that Cal had been promising to tackle with Jake for weeks. The trail was popular with families, well-maintained, but challenging enough to give an 8-year-old a sense of real accomplishment. "Remember the rules," Cal said as they shouldered their packs. "Stay on the trail, don't wander off. And if I see something dangerous, call for you immediately," Jake recited. "Got it, Dad." The first mile passed in comfortable companionship, with Jake's chatter providing a pleasant soundtrack to their climb. Cal found himself relaxing in a way that had become increasingly rare, letting the rhythm of walking and the beauty of the landscape quiet the constant low-level anxiety that seemed to be his default state these days. They were approaching a particularly scenic overlook when Cal heard it, a sound that cut through the mountain silence like a knife. It was a child's voice, high and terrified, calling for help. Cal's entire body went rigid, every instinct from his firefighting days snapping to attention. "Jake, stop!" "What is it, Dad?" "Shh, listen." The cry came again, definitely a young voice, definitely in distress. Cal's mind immediately shifted into emergency mode, assessing distance, terrain, and potential hazards. "Someone's in trouble," Jake whispered, his eyes wide. "Stay right here," Cal commanded, his voice carrying the authority that had once directed firefighting crews through burning buildings. "Don't move from this spot. Do you understand me?" Jake nodded solemnly, recognizing the tone that meant his father was no longer just Dad, but someone whose orders could mean the difference between safety and danger. Cal pushed through the underbrush toward the sound, his trained eye automatically cataloging potential hazards: loose rock, unstable footing, areas where a fall could be fatal. The voice was coming from below the main trail, in a small ravine where hikers sometimes ventured off-path to explore. What he found made his blood run cold. A girl, maybe 9 or 10 years old, was trapped beneath a massive fallen aspen that had clearly come down recently. The tree's trunk, easily 18 inches in diameter, had her right leg pinned against the rocky ground. She was conscious, but clearly in shock, her face pale and streaked with tears. "Hey there," Cal said, keeping his voice calm and reassuring as he approached. "I'm Cal, and I'm here to help you." "Can you tell me your name?" "Emma," the girl whispered. "My leg, I can't move my leg." Cal knelt beside her, his hands already moving in the practiced assessment patterns he'd learned years ago. The leg was definitely broken. He could see the unnatural angle even without moving the tree, but there was no arterial bleeding, which meant they had time to do this right. "Emma, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Cal said, looking directly into her frightened eyes. "I used to be a firefighter, which means I know exactly how to get you out of here safely, but I need you to be brave and help me, okay?" The girl nodded, some of the panic leaving her face as she responded to Cal's confident tone. "First, I'm going to check to make sure you're not hurt anywhere else." Cal ran his hands along her arms, shoulders, and torso, relieved to find no other obvious injuries. Good news, it looks like it's just your leg. Now I'm going to make you as comfortable as possible, and then I'm going to lift this tree off you. Cal quickly assessed the situation. The tree was heavy, but not impossible to move if he could get proper leverage. More importantly, he needed to stabilize Emma's leg before attempting to free her. He stripped off his flannel shirt, using his pocket knife to cut it into strips. This might hurt a little, he warned, as he began fashioning a makeshift splint using broken branches and the fabric strips. But it's going to help protect your leg when I move the tree. Emma bit her lip but didn't cry out as Cal worked. The girl had courage. He'd give her that. My mom's going to be so worried, Emma said suddenly. We were supposed to meet back at the lodge by noon. What lodge, sweetheart? Mountain View Lodge. Mum said she had some work calls to make, so I was exploring by myself. She's going to be so mad. Cal knew the Mountain View Lodge. It was the most expensive resort in the area, the kind of place where wealthy tourists came to play at roughing it while enjoying five-star amenities. But right now, all that mattered was getting this brave little girl to safety. Your mom's not going to be mad, Cal assured her. She's going to be grateful that you're okay. Now I'm going to call for my son Jake to come help us, and then we're going to get you out of here. Jake! Cal called, his voice carrying easily through the mountain air. I need you to come down here, but be very careful. Jake appeared at the edge of the ravine within moments, his face serious as he took in the situation. Is she okay, Dad? She's going to be fine. Jake, this is Emma. Emma, this is my son, Jake. Jake, I need you to come down here slowly and help me lift this tree. Jake scrambled down the rocky slope with the sure-footedness of youth, immediately positioning himself where Cal indicated. On 3, Cal said, gripping the tree trunk. 1, 2, 3. The aspen lifted more easily than Cal had expected, and he was able to shift it completely off Emma's leg. The girl gasped but didn't scream, though Cal could see fresh tears of pain in her eyes. You did great, Emma, he said, immediately beginning to check her leg more thoroughly. The break was definitely there, but it appeared to be a clean fracture, rather than a compound injury. Jake, hand me my pack. Cal pulled out his first aid kit, a professional-grade kit he'd maintained from his firefighting days, and began properly stabilizing Emma's leg. Years of emergency response training kicked in as he worked, his movements efficient and sure. Now comes the hard part, he told Emma. I'm going to carry you out of here, but it's going to be a long walk and it might hurt. Can you be brave for just a little longer? I think so, Emma said, though her voice was getting weaker. Cal fashioned a carrying sling from his remaining gear, then carefully lifted Emma in his arms. She was small for her age, but the hike back to the parking lot would still be challenging, with the additional weight and the need to move carefully over uneven terrain. Jake, you're going to be my eyes and ears, Cal said. I need you to walk ahead of me and warn me about any rocks or holes or anything that might make me trip. Can you do that? Absolutely, Dad. The hike out was one of the longest hours of Cal's life. Emma drifted in and out of consciousness, which worried him but also meant she was feeling less pain. Jake proved himself to be an excellent guide, carefully marking every potential hazard, and even finding the easiest path when the trail offered options. By the time they reached the parking lot, Cal was exhausted but triumphant. He quickly loaded Emma into his truck while Jake called 911 from Cal's cell phone, requesting an ambulance meet them at Millbrook General Hospital. The drive to the hospital was a blur of back-road navigation and constant monitoring of Emma's condition. She was definitely in shock, but her vital signs seemed stable. Cal found himself talking to her constantly, sharing stories about Jake and their life in Millbrook, anything to keep her conscious and aware. At the hospital, Cal was relieved to hand Emma over to the emergency room staff, who immediately whisked her away for x-rays and proper medical care. He and Jake found themselves in the waiting room, both covered in dirt and pine needles, sharing a candy bar from the vending machine while they waited for word about Emma's condition. Dad, Jake said quietly, you were really cool back there. Like superhero cool. Cal felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with physical exhaustion. Thanks, buddy. You were pretty heroic yourself. I couldn't have done it without you. They were still sitting there, comfortable in their shed. Accomplishment. When the emergency room doors burst open and a woman rushed in like a force of nature. She was tall, elegantly dressed despite the outdoor setting, with dark hair pulled back in a ponytail and the kind of natural grace that suggested wealth and education. but her face was creased with worry, and her hands shook as she approached. "The reception desk. I'm looking for Emma Winslow," she said, her voice tight with controlled panic. "My daughter? She was brought in with a broken leg." Cal stood up, recognizing this as his cue. "Excuse me, are you Emma's mother?" The woman turned, and Cal found himself looking into the most striking green eyes he'd ever seen. There was intelligence there, and strength, but also a vulnerability that seemed at odds with her polished exterior. "Yes, I'm Natalie Winslow. Do you know something about Emma?" "I'm Cal Porter, and this is my son Jake. We're the ones who found Emma and brought her in." The change in Natalie's expression was immediate and profound. Relief, gratitude, and something else Cal couldn't quite identify flickered across her features before she took a step toward him. "You found her? You saved her?" Natalie's voice broke slightly on the last word. "She's going to be fine," Cal said quickly. "Clean break, no complications. The doctors are taking good care of her." Natalie closed her eyes for a moment, and Cal could see her fighting to maintain her composure. When she opened them again, there was a depth of gratitude there that made Cal slightly uncomfortable. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "I don't even know where to begin. If something had happened to her, any parent would have done the same thing," Cal said, meaning it. "I'm just glad we were there." Natalie looked at him for a long moment, as if trying to memorize his face. "Please, let me do something, anything. I could pay you." "No." Cal's response was immediate and firm. "Absolutely not. I didn't help Emma because I expected payment. I helped her because she needed help." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, a surprise that seemed deeper than his simple refusal of money. Of course, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to offend you." "No offense taken. You're worried about your daughter. That's what matters." A nurse appeared at that moment to inform Natalie that Emma was asking for her, and the woman hurried toward the treatment rooms. But she paused at the doorway, looking back at Cal and Jake. "Thank you," she said simply. "Both of you. More than you can possibly know." And then she was gone, leaving Cal with the strangest feeling that this chance encounter was going to prove far more significant than either of them could possibly imagine. The days following Emma's rescue settled into their familiar rhythm, but Cal found his thoughts drifting more often than usual to the woman with the striking green eyes. There was something about Natalie Winslow that he couldn't quite shake. Not just her obvious relief and gratitude, but something deeper. A quality of strength wrapped in vulnerability that reminded him of how he'd felt in those early days after Sarah's death. Tuesday morning brought the usual routine of getting Jake ready for school and himself ready for work, but as Cal was locking the front door, he noticed Mrs. Patterson hurrying across the yard with unusual urgency. "Cal, dear," she called, slightly out of breath. "There's someone at the hardware store asking for you, a young girl with her mother. They said something about Saturday." Cal's stomach did an unexpected flip. "Did they give you a name?" "Emma something. Sweet little thing with a cast on her leg. Her mother seemed quite determined to speak with you." Jake, who had been only half listening while adjusting his backpack, suddenly perked up. "Emma? The girl from the mountain? She's okay?" "Sounds like it," Cal said, though he felt strangely nervous about the prospect of seeing Natalie Winslow again. "Mrs. Patterson, would you mind walking Jake to school today? I should probably get to the store." "Of course, dear. Go on ahead." The drive to Miller's Hardware seemed both too long and too short. Cal found himself checking his appearance in the rearview mirror, which was ridiculous. He was going to work, not on a date, but something about Natalie had unsettled him in a way he wasn't entirely comfortable examining. He spotted them before he even parked. Emma was sitting on the bench outside the store, her right leg encased in a bright purple cast, while Natalie stood beside her, looking somehow out of place despite her obvious effort to dress casually. She traded the hiking clothes for dark jeans and a cream-colored sweater, but everything about her still whispered money and sophistication. "Mr. Porter!" Emma called out as soon as she saw him, her face lighting up with genuine excitement. "Look, I got a purple cast!" Cal couldn't help but smile as he approached. The girl's resilience was remarkable. She looked healthier and happier than she had any right to after her ordeal. "That's quite a fashion statement," he said, crouching down to examine the cast more closely. "Did you pick the color yourself?" "Mom said I could choose any color I wanted, and purple's my favorite. The doctor said I'll have it for 6 weeks, and then I get to watch them cut it off with a special saw." Cal glanced up at Natalie, who was watching the interaction with an expression he couldn't quite read. "How's she really doing?" "Better than I had any right to hope," Natalie said, her voice carrying that same note of profound gratitude he remembered from the hospital. "The orthopedist said you did an excellent job with the field stabilization. If you hadn't immobilized her leg properly—" She didn't finish the sentence, but Cal understood. He'd seen enough injuries to know how much worse things could have been. "I'm just glad she's okay," he said, standing up. "But I have to admit I'm surprised to see you both. Here, is there something you need?" Emma reached into a small backpack beside her on the bench and pulled out what was clearly a handmade card. The front featured a crayon drawing of a mountain scene with 3 stick figures. One large figure carrying a smaller one, while a third figure led the way. Above it, in careful second-grade handwriting, were the words, "Thank you, Hero Dad." "I made this for you," Emma said, holding out the card with both hands. "Mom helped me with the spelling, but I did all the drawing myself." Cal accepted the card with genuine emotion. Inside, Emma had written, "Dear Mr. Porter, thank you for saving me and being so brave. You are the best hero ever. Your friend Emma. P.S. Jake is really cool too." This is beautiful, Emma. Thank you so much." Cal looked up to find Natalie watching him with an intensity that made him slightly uncomfortable. "You really didn't need to go to all this trouble." "Yes, we did," Natalie said firmly. "Emma insisted, and frankly, so did I. What you did on Saturday, it meant everything to us." There was an awkward pause as Cal struggled to find the right response. He'd never been comfortable with gratitude, even when it was justified. Years of emergency response work had taught him that doing the right thing was its own reward. "Would you like to come inside?" he asked, gesturing toward the store. "It's getting chilly out here, and Emma probably shouldn't be sitting in the cold with that cast." "That would be nice," Natalie said, helping Emma to her feet. Inside Miller's Hardware, Cal watched Natalie's reaction to his workplace with curious interest. She seemed genuinely fascinated by the organized chaos of tools, supplies, and equipment that filled every available space. Emma, meanwhile, was immediately drawn to a display of colorful rope near the front counter. "This is where you work?" Natalie asked, running her hand along a row of paint samples. 5 days a week, Cal confirmed. "It's not glamorous, but it's honest work, and Tom's a good boss." "I think it's wonderful," Natalie said, and something in her tone suggested she meant it. "There's something satisfying about a place where people come to fix things, to build things. It must be rewarding to help them solve their problems." Cal found himself studying her face, looking for signs of condescension or polite insincerity, but her expression seemed genuinely thoughtful. "You'd be surprised how many people come in here completely overwhelmed by home improvement projects. Sometimes just pointing them toward the right aisle makes their whole day better." "Mom," Emma called from her position near the rope display, "can we buy some of this rope? I want to learn how to tie knots like Mr. Porter showed me." Natalie looked confused. "When did he show you knots?" "When he was making the thing for my leg," Emma explained. "He tied all these special knots to hold the sticks in place. He said firefighters have to know lots of different knots for different jobs." "She's got a good memory," Cal said, "though I'm not sure your mother wants you practicing rope work with a broken leg." "Actually," Natalie said slowly, "I think that's a wonderful idea. Emma's always been interested in practical skills, and learning something from her rescuer seems appropriate." Cal found himself warming to this woman, despite his usual caution around strangers. There was something refreshing about her willingness to let Emma pursue interests that might get her dirty or challenge her in real ways. "Tell you what," he said to Emma, "if your mom agrees, I could show you and Jake some basic knots this weekend. Nothing dangerous, just useful things like how to tie a proper square knot or a bowline." Emma's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Could we, Mom? Please?" Natalie hesitated, and Cal could see her weighing considerations he couldn't guess at. "I wouldn't want to impose on your time." "No imposition," Cal said quickly. "Jake would love it, and honestly, it would be nice for Emma to see that she didn't let the mountain beat her. Sometimes the best way to get over a scare is to learn more about the thing that scared you." "In that case, yes," Natalie said, her smile transforming her entire face. "I think that would be wonderful." They were interrupted by the arrival of Tom Miller, who emerged from the back office with his characteristic combination of curiosity and protective instinct toward his employees. "Cal, everything all right out here?" Tom, I'd like you to meet Natalie and Emma Winslow. Emma's the young lady I told you about from Saturday's hike. Tom's expression immediately softened as he took in Emma's cast and bright smile. Well, I'll be. You're the little adventurer who gave everyone such a scare. How are you feeling, sweetheart? Much better, thank you, Emma said politely. Mr. Porter is the best rescuer in the whole world. That he is, Tom agreed, shooting. Cal, a meaningful look. We're lucky to have him around here. Cal felt heat rise in his cheeks. Tom, don't you, Tom, me, son. What you did up there was something special, and this whole town knows it. Tom turned to Natalie. I hope you know. You've got a real hero in your corner. I'm beginning to understand that, Natalie said, her gaze finding Cal's and holding it for a moment longer than was strictly comfortable. The bell above the door chimed, announcing the arrival of Cal's first customer of the day, Mrs. Kowalski, looking for advice about a leaky faucet. Cal excused himself to help her, but he was acutely aware of Natalie and Emma watching as he worked. Young man, Mrs. Kowalski said after Cal had loaded her purchase into her car, that's quite a lovely family you've got visiting. Oh, we're not. Cal stumbled over the words, realizing how the situation must have looked to outside observers. Mrs. Kowalski's knowing smile suggested she wasn't buying his protests. Of course, dear, none of my business anyway. When Cal returned to the store, he found Natalie helping Emma select a length of rope, while Tom regaled them with stories about the various projects customers had brought to him over the years. There was something so natural about the scene that Cal felt a pang of longing he hadn't experienced in months. All set? He asked as they approached the counter. I think so, Natalie said. How much do we owe you for the rope? On the house, Cal said quickly. Consider it part of Emma's continuing education. Natalie looked like she wanted to argue, but something in Cal's expression must have warned her off. Thank you for everything. As they prepared to leave, Emma turned back to Cal with sudden urgency. Mr. Porter, what's Jake's favorite color? I want to make him a card too, since he helped save me. Blue, Cal said without hesitation. Definitely blue. Perfect. I'll bring it when we come for knot lessons. After they left, Cal found himself standing at the front window, watching Natalie help Emma into what he now realized was an expensive SUV. There was something about the careful way she moved, the obvious quality of her clothes, despite their casual style, that suggested more money than was typical for Millbrook visitors. Nice family, Tom commented from behind him. It's not like that, Cal said, turning away from the window. Course not, Tom said with barely concealed amusement. Though if I was 30 years younger and had just rescued that woman's daughter, I might consider whether it could be like that. Cal didn't respond, but as he went back to his morning tasks, he found himself thinking about Natalie's smile and the way Emma had called him a hero. It had been a long time since he'd felt like anyone's hero, least of all his own. The knot-tying lesson that Saturday turned into something much more significant than Cal had anticipated. What started as a simple tutorial in his backyard evolved into an afternoon of easy conversation, shared laughter, and the kind of natural connection that seemed to surprise both adults. Emma arrived with her promise card for Jake, featuring blue stick figures and the message, "Thank you for helping save me," and immediately threw herself into learning with the single-minded determination that seemed to be her trademark. Jake, initially shy around the newcomers, quickly warmed to Emma's enthusiasm and appointed himself her patient instructor in the finer points of rope work. "No, you go under first, then over," Jake explained seriously, demonstrating a basic square knot for what must have been the 10th time. "See, under, over, then the other way." Cal watched his son with a mixture of pride and amazement. In just 1 week, Jake had transformed from the quiet boy, who still woke up some nights missing his mother, into a confident teacher who took obvious pride in helping someone else learn. "Your son is remarkable," Natalie said quietly, settling onto the porch step beside Cal while the children worked on their knots in the grass. "The way he's taken Emma under his wing, it's really quite sweet. He's a good kid," Cal agreed, though privately he was startled by how much Jake seemed to be blossoming in Emma's presence. He's been through a lot the past couple of years. "It's nice to see him acting like a regular 8-year-old again." "If you don't mind me asking," Natalie said carefully, "what happened? You mentioned he'd been through a lot." Cal felt the familiar tightness in his chest that came whenever someone approached the subject of Sarah. He'd become expert at deflecting these conversations, but something about Natalie's gentle tone made him want to answer honestly. His mother. Died, Cal said simply. Car accident 2 years ago. It's been just the two of us ever since. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, and when Cal glanced at her, he saw genuine compassion in her expression, rather than the uncomfortable pity he'd grown accustomed to receiving. I'm so sorry, she said. That must have been devastating for both of you. It was, still is some days. Cal found himself continuing despite his usual reticence. Jake was only 6 when it happened. He's been incredibly brave, but sometimes I wonder if I'm enough for him, if I can give him everything he needs. From what I've seen, Natalie said softly, you're giving him exactly what he needs. Love, stability, and the confidence to help others. Those aren't small things. Cal looked at her with surprise. Most people offered platitudes about time healing wounds or everything happening for a reason. Natalie's recognition of the ongoing work of single parenthood felt more honest somehow. What about Emma's father? Cal asked, then immediately regretted the personal question. I'm sorry, that's none of my business. No, it's fine, Natalie said, though her expression tightened slightly. Emma's father, let's just say he's not in the picture. It's been just the two of us since she was very small. There was something in her tone that suggested more story there, but Cal recognized the boundaries of polite conversation. Whatever had happened with Emma's father, it was clearly a subject Natalie preferred not to explore with near strangers. Single parenting is hard, he said instead. But Emma seems like she's thriving. You're obviously doing something right. Some days I'm not so sure, Natalie admitted. I work too much, I worry too much, and I probably overcompensate in ways that aren't healthy for either of us. This trip to Colorado, it was supposed to be about slowing down, spending quality time together, and instead I nearly lost her on a mountain trail. But you didn't lose her, Cal pointed out. And from what I saw at the hospital, you're exactly the kind of mother Emma needs. Present, caring, willing to let her take appropriate risks even after she's been hurt. Natalie smiled. The first, truly, relaxed expression he'd seen from her. Thank you for saying that. I needed to hear it. They were interrupted by triumphant shouts from the yard, where Emma had finally managed to tie a perfect bowline knot. Jake was practically vibrating with excitement as he called for the adults to come admire Emma's achievement. That's fantastic. Emma, Cal said, examining her work with appropriate seriousness. That's one of the most useful knots you can learn. Sailors use it, climbers use it, and it's almost impossible to jam under pressure. Can we learn another one? Emma asked eagerly. Please. Cal glanced at Natalie, who nodded with amusement. How about a clove hitch? That's another really practical one. The afternoon stretched on in a pleasant haze of rope work, storytelling, and the kind of easy conversation that made time seem irrelevant. Cal found himself sharing stories about his firefighting days, carefully edited versions that emphasized the teamwork and problem-solving aspects rather than the danger, while Natalie proved to have a surprising knowledge of outdoor skills and survival techniques. You seem to know a lot about wilderness safety for someone staying at Mountain View Lodge, Cal observed, as they watched the children practice their new knots. I've always believed in being prepared, Natalie said, though something in her tone suggested there was more to it than simple preparedness. Besides, after what happened to Emma, I think I need to brush up on my emergency response skills. Have you thought about taking a wilderness first aid course? The community college offers them a couple times a year, and they're really practical. For anyone who spends time outdoors. Natalie's eyes lit up with genuine interest. That's a wonderful idea. Do you think you might be interested in taking it too? I mean, you probably already know everything they teach, but it might be nice to have a familiar face in the class. Cal felt something flutter in his chest that he hadn't experienced in longer than he cared to admit. I think that sounds like a great idea, he heard himself saying. It never hurts to refresh your skills, and the instructor they use is really good. Mom, Emma called from her position on the grass. Jake says his dad makes the best grilled cheese sandwiches in Colorado. Can we stay for dinner? Cal felt heat rise in his cheeks. Emma, you can't just invite yourself. Actually, Natalie interrupted, that sounds wonderful if we're not imposing. I'd love to try these legendary grilled cheese sandwiches. And so, somehow, Cal found himself preparing dinner for four in his modest kitchen, while Jake and Emma set the table with the kind of elaborate care usually reserved for state dinners. Natalie proved to be an unexpectedly helpful assistant, chopping vegetables for a simple salad with the efficiency of someone comfortable in kitchens. "This is nice," she said as they worked side by side at the counter. "Domestic. I don't get to do this very often." "Demanding job?" Cal asked, though he realized he still had no clear idea what Natalie did for work. "Something like that," she said, and again Cal caught that slight evasiveness that suggested more complexity than she was sharing. "What about you? Do you miss firefighting?" It was Cal's turn to hesitate. "Every day," he admitted finally, "but that life, it wasn't compatible with being the kind of father Jake needs. The hours, the stress, the constant possibility of not coming home. After Sarah died, I realized I needed to choose priorities differently. That must have been a difficult decision." It was. But looking at Jake now, seeing how stable and happy he is, I know I made the right choice. Dinner was a revelation. The four of them fell into conversation as easily as if they'd been sharing meals for years. Emma regaled them with stories about her school in, Cal noted, California, while Jake shared his latest adventures in Mrs. Thompson's third-grade class. Natalie proved to be an engaged listener who asked thoughtful questions and seemed genuinely interested in the details of small-town life. As the evening wound down and they prepared to clear the table, Cal's phone rang. The caller ID showed Chief Morrison from the Millbrook Fire Department. "Excuse me," Cal said, stepping into the living room to take the call. "Cal, sorry to bother you at home," Chief Morrison said, "but we've got a situation developing up on Lookout Ridge. Hiking party's been overdue for 6 hours, and with the weather moving in, we're organizing a search. I know you're not on the roster anymore, but you know that area better than anyone, and frankly, we could use your expertise." Cal felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came with emergency calls. Through the kitchen doorway, he could see Natalie helping Jake clear dishes, while Emma told an animated story about her art class. The scene was so perfectly domestic, so far removed from the world of emergency response, that for a moment he felt torn between two very different versions of himself. "I'll be there in 20 minutes, he said finally. When he returned to the kitchen, 3 pairs of eyes were watching him with varying degrees of concern. "Everything okay, Dad?" Jake asked. "There's a search and rescue operation starting," Cal explained. "Some hikers are missing up on Lookout Ridge. I need to go help." "Of course you do," Natalie said immediately. "What can we do to help?" Cal looked at her with surprise. "You don't need to—" "I meant with Jake," she clarified. "If you need someone to stay with him while you're gone." Cal felt something shift in his chest, a warmth that had nothing to do with the dinner they'd shared. The offer was practical, thoughtful, and spoke to an understanding of single parenthood that most people didn't possess. "That's very kind of you," he said, "but Mrs. Patterson can come over. I couldn't ask you to—" "Dad," Jake interrupted, "could Emma sleep over? We could have a camp-out in the living room, and Natalie could make sure we don't burn the house down." Cal looked at his son's hopeful face, then at Emma's equally eager expression, and finally at Natalie's gentle smile. "Only if you're absolutely sure," he said to Natalie. "I don't know how long this will take." "We'll be fine," she assured him. "Go do what you do best." As Cal gathered his gear and prepared to leave, he found himself marveling at how naturally this unusual family grouping had formed. Jake was already explaining the finer points of living room camping to Emma, while Natalie was making mental notes about bedtime routines and emergency contacts. "Be careful," she said as he headed for the door, and something in her tone made him turn back. "Always am," he said, though they both knew that careful and search and rescue didn't always go together. "I mean it," Natalie said, her green eyes serious. "Jake needs you to come home safely, and so does Emma. She's gotten quite attached to her rescuer." Cal felt his throat tighten unexpectedly. "I'll be back before breakfast," he promised. As he drove toward Lookout Ridge, Cal found himself thinking about the evening he was leaving behind. The easy conversation, the shared laughter, the sense of family that had settled over his kitchen, like a warm blanket. It had been so long since his house had felt truly full, so long since Jake had someone besides his father to look up to. But even as these thoughts warmed him, a small voice in the back of his mind wondered what he really knew about Natalie Winslow. She was clearly educated, obviously well off, and seemed genuinely caring toward both children. But there was something about her careful evasions, her reluctance to discuss her work or her background, that suggested she was keeping significant parts of her life private. As he pulled into the fire station parking lot and prepared to join the search team, Cal pushed these concerns aside. Whatever Natalie's secrets might be, she'd proven herself trustworthy with the most important thing in his life, his son. For now, that was enough. Cal returned home at dawn to find his living room transformed into an elaborate blanket fort, with Jake and Emma sleeping peacefully among scattered books and empty popcorn bowls. Natalie was curled up in his reading chair, still dressed, but covered with the throw blanket Sarah had knitted their first winter together. The sight of her there, in his wife's chair, surrounded by the evidence of a successful sleepover, created a complex mix of emotions Cal wasn't quite prepared to examine. He moved quietly through the kitchen, starting coffee and surveying the surprisingly minimal damage 2 8-year-olds and their supervisor had managed to inflict on his home. The dishes were washed, the counters were clean, and there was even a plate of homemade pancakes waiting in the refrigerator with a note, "For the returning hero. Just reheat in microwave. The kids were perfect. Thank you for trusting me." And Cal found himself staring at the note longer than was strictly necessary, touched by the thoughtfulness and the careful way she'd signed it. Not Natalie or Mrs. Winslow, but simply N, as if they'd moved past formalities into something more personal. How did it go? Natalie's soft voice made him turn. She was standing in the kitchen doorway, hair mussed from sleep, but somehow still managing to look elegant. "We found them," Cal said quietly. "Cold and scared, but safe. Family from Denver who'd taken a wrong trail and gotten turned around when the fog rolled in." "Thank goodness." Natalie moved to the coffee maker, automatically pouring 2 cups, as if this morning routine was something they'd established over years rather than hours. "You must be exhausted." Cal accepted the coffee gratefully, noting how Natalie had prepared it exactly the way he liked it, strong black with just a hint of sugar. The observation was both comforting and slightly unsettling, suggesting she'd been paying closer attention to his preferences than he'd realized. "How were the kids?" "Angels," Natalie said with a smile that suggested the evening hadn't been entirely without challenges. "Though I learned that Jake has very strong opinions about the proper way to build a blanket fort, and Emma has apparently inherited my stubborn streak when it comes to bedtime negotiations." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping their coffee and listening to the soft sounds of children sleeping in the next room. Cal found himself studying Natalie's profile in the early morning light, noting the way exhaustion had softened her usual careful composure. "You didn't have to clean up," he said finally. "Of course I did. You trusted me with your son. That's not something I take lightly." There was something in her tone that suggested deeper meaning, and Cal found himself wondering again about the circumstances that had made her a single mother. Emma clearly adored her, but there was an independence to their relationship that spoke of long practice at being a team of 2. "Natalie," he began, then stopped, unsure how to voice the questions that had been building over the past few weeks. "What is it?" Cal hesitated, torn between curiosity and respect for her obvious boundaries. "I was wondering, you mentioned you work too much, but you've been in Millbrook for what, 3 weeks now? That's a pretty generous vacation policy." He watched something flicker across Natalie's expression, wariness perhaps, or calculation. "I'm self-employed," she said after a moment. "I have more flexibility than most people." It wasn't quite an answer, and they both knew it, but before Cal could decide whether to push further, the sound of stirring children drifted from the living room, followed by Jake's voice announcing to Emma that they needed to take down the fort before his dad saw the mess. "Too late," Cal called out, earning a guilty giggle from his son. The next hour passed in the pleasant chaos of breakfast preparation and sleepover aftermath. Emma proved to be as enthusiastic about Cal's famous pancakes as Jake had advertised, while both children regaled the adults with detailed accounts of their evening adventures. Watching Natalie interact with Jake, Cal was struck by her natural ease with children and her genuine interest in his son's opinions and observations. "Mr. Porter," Emma said as they finished eating, "Jake says you might teach us how to build a real campfire sometime. Could you?" Cal glanced at Natalie, who nodded encouragingly. I think that could be arranged, though we'd need to find a safe place to practice, and your mom would need to approve the lesson plan. I trust your judgment, Natalie said. And something. In the way she said it made Cal's chest tighten unexpectedly. After breakfast, as they prepared for Natalie and Emma to return to their lodge, Cal found himself reluctant to see them leave. The morning had felt so natural, so right, that the prospect of returning to his and Jake's usual routine seemed oddly empty. "What are your plans for the rest of the day?" he asked, as Natalie gathered Emma's overnight things. "Nothing too exciting. Emma needs to catch up on some schoolwork, and I have a few calls to make." Again, that slight evasiveness when her work came up. Cal was beginning to recognize the pattern, though he still couldn't figure out what she might be hiding. Self-employment covered a lot of territory, from freelance consulting to running a small business, but something about Natalie's careful phrasing suggested more complexity than she was sharing. "Well," he said, "if you find yourselves free this afternoon, Jake and I usually take a walk around Millbrook Lake on Sundays. Emma might enjoy feeding the ducks." "That sounds wonderful," Natalie said, her smile seeming more relaxed than it had been all morning. "What time?" "Around 2. We could meet at the main parking area." As they made plans, Cal noticed Jake watching the interaction with obvious satisfaction. His son had been uncharacteristically quiet during breakfast, but there was something in his expression that suggested he was processing the significance of these new relationships in ways that both pleased and concerned his father. After Natalie and Emma left, Cal found himself dealing with Jake's inevitable questions about their new friends. "Dad, do you like Natalie?" The directness of the question caught Cal off guard. "She seems like a very nice person." "Why? I mean, do you like her? Like how you used to like Mom?" Cal felt his throat tighten. Jake so rarely mentioned Sarah directly that the comparison hit him like a physical blow. "Buddy, it's complicated. But you do like her, right?" "I can tell." Cal studied his son's face, looking for signs of distress or jealousy. But Jake's expression seemed more curious than troubled. "Would it bother you if I did?" Jake considered this with the seriousness he brought to all important questions. "I don't think so. Mom's not coming back, and you get lonely sometimes. I can tell that too." The matter-of-fact way Jake delivered this observation nearly undid Cal completely. "You're pretty smart for an 8-year-old, and Emma's really cool. Plus, Natalie makes really good pancakes, almost as good as yours." Cal laughed despite the emotional weight of the conversation. High praise indeed. Their afternoon walk around the lake turned into an extended exploration of the surrounding trails, with Emma proving to be as adventurous on foot as Jake had predicted. Natalie kept pace easily, asking knowledgeable questions about the local wildlife and vegetation that suggested more outdoor experience than her polished appearance might have indicated. "You really do know a lot about wilderness skills," Cal observed as they paused at a scenic overlook. "I spent a lot of summers at camps when I was Emma's age," Natalie said. "Hiking, canoeing, survival skills. My parents believed in practical education." It was the first time she'd mentioned her family, and Cal found himself hungry for more details about her background. But before he could ask follow-up questions, Emma called their attention to a family of deer grazing in the meadow below. As they watched the deer, Cal became aware of Natalie standing close beside him, close enough that he could smell her subtle perfume and feel the warmth of her presence. When she glanced up at him, their eyes met and held for a moment longer than casual conversation warranted. The spell was broken by Jake's announcement that he and Emma had discovered what looked like an old Native American grinding stone near the water's edge. As the adults moved to examine the children's find, Cal found his thoughts churning with possibilities and concerns in equal measure. He was attracted to Natalie. That much was becoming impossible to deny, but attraction was complicated when children were involved, when his own grief was still a daily companion, and when the object of his interest seemed to be keeping significant parts of her life hidden from view. That evening, after Jake had gone to bed full of stories about their day, Cal found himself standing on his back porch with a cup of coffee, looking out at the mountains and thinking about the changes that seemed to be happening in his carefully ordered life. For 2 years, he'd focused entirely on providing stability for Jake and learning to navigate single parenthood. Romance, relationship, the possibility of expanding their family of 2, these had seemed like luxuries he couldn't afford, risks he wasn't prepared to take. But watching Jake's easy friendship with Emma, seeing his son's obvious approval of Natalie, forced Cal to consider whether his caution was really about protecting Jake or protecting himself. Sarah's death had taught him how quickly happiness could be destroyed, how completely life could change in a single moment. The prospect of opening his heart again, of making himself vulnerable to that kind of loss, terrified him in ways that burning buildings and dangerous rescues never had. His phone buzzed with a text message, interrupting his brooding thoughts. The number wasn't in his contacts, but the message was unmistakably from Natalie. "Thank you for today. Emma hasn't stopped talking about the deer and the grinding stone. She wants to know if Jake would like to go rock hunting with us tomorrow after school. If you're interested, of course." And Cal stared at the message for a long moment, recognizing it for what it was, an invitation to continue whatever was developing between their families. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he considered his response. Finally, he typed back, "Jake would love that. What time should we meet you?" The response came almost immediately. 4:30 at the Old Quarry Road. Emma found a book about Colorado geology at the library, and apparently we need to find examples of igneous intrusions, whatever those are. Cal smiled, despite his complicated feelings. "I can help with the geological education. See you tomorrow." As he prepared for bed, Cal found himself looking forward to the next day with an anticipation he hadn't felt in longer than he cared to admit. Whatever was happening between him and Natalie, whatever secrets she might be keeping, and whatever risks might be involved, he was beginning to understand that some opportunities were too precious to let fear drive them away. But as he settled into sleep, Cal couldn't shake the feeling that there were conversations coming that would test whatever foundation they were building together. Natalie's careful evasions about her work and background were becoming harder to ignore, and sooner or later, the truth about her life outside Millbrook would have to surface. What he couldn't know was that Natalie was lying awake in her luxurious lodge suite, staring at the ceiling and wrestling with identical concerns. Every day she spent with Cal, and Jake made her deception feel heavier. But every moment of genuine happiness Emma experienced in their company made the thought of confession more terrifying. The simple truth was that neither of them was quite ready to trust the other with their complete honesty, even as they were both beginning to suspect that what they were building together might be worth the risk. The camping trip had been Emma's idea, proposed with the kind of infectious enthusiasm that made refusal impossible. A real adventure, she'd called it, where we sleep outside and cook over a fire and see all the stars. Jake had immediately championed the plan, and before Cal quite knew how it had happened, he found himself loading camping gear into his truck for a weekend at Crystal Lake, 20 miles into the national forest. Natalie had initially seemed hesitant about the idea, citing concerns about Emma's still healing leg and her own lack of recent camping experience. But Emma's excitement proved overwhelming, and Natalie's resistance crumbled when her daughter pointed out that they'd have the best camping teacher in Colorado to keep them safe. Now, as Cal navigated the winding forest road toward their campsite, he found himself stealing glances at Natalie in the passenger seat. She'd traded her usual polished casual wear for genuine outdoor gear, hiking boots, cargo pants, and a fleece jacket that looked both expensive and practical. The transformation was striking, as if she'd shed a layer of careful sophistication. Along with her designer clothes, "You look like you know what you're doing," Cal observed, as they pulled into the campsite. "I told you, I spent a lot of summers camping," Natalie replied, but there was something almost wistful in her tone. "Though it's been longer than I care to admit since I've slept in a tent." The campsite was perfect, a level clearing surrounded by towering pines, with easy access to the lake and a stone fire ring that suggested many previous camping families had found this spot equally appealing. Jake and Emma immediately began exploring the area with the kind of systematic thoroughness that reminded Cal of geological surveyors mapping new territory. "Dad, look at this," Jake called from near the water's edge. "There's a whole family of beavers," and Emma found what might be an old beaver dam. Cal and Natalie followed the children's voices to discover that Emma had indeed found the remnants of a beaver dam, plus what appeared to be several active lodges along the far shore of the lake. "This is incredible," Natalie said, her voice filled with genuine wonder. Emma, do you realize how lucky we are to see this? Beaver families are notoriously shy around humans. Can we watch them build stuff? Emma asked eagerly. Jake says beavers are like nature's construction workers. If we're very quiet and very patient, we might get to see them working this evening, Cal said. Beavers are most active at dusk and dawn. The afternoon passed in a blur of tent setup, firewood gathering, and camp organization. Cal was impressed by how quickly Natalie fell back into camping rhythms, working alongside him to establish their temporary home with the kind of easy cooperation that suggested either extensive experience or natural aptitude for outdoor life. "You're better at this than you claimed," he commented as she expertly rigged a tarp over their cooking area. "Muscle memory," Natalie said with a smile that seemed more relaxed than any expression he'd seen from her. "Amazing how it all comes back." As evening approached and they gathered around the campfire Cal had built, the conversation turned to stories of previous camping adventures. Jake regaled them with tales of his and Cal's earlier expeditions, while Emma shared memories of camp, experiences that sounded both exciting and expensive. "What about you?" Cal asked Natalie, as they watched the children toast marshmallows with the intense concentration the task demanded. "What's your best camping story?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, staring into the fire with an expression that suggested she was sifting through memories that carried more weight than simple nostalgia. "When I was 12, she said finally, "my family took a 2-week trip through Yellowstone and Grand Teton. Just us, no guides, no luxury lodges. My father was a demanding man, but he believed in self-sufficiency. That trip taught me more about myself than anything I learned in school." There was something in her tone that made Cal look at her more closely. The way she'd said demanding suggested complexities in her family relationships that she wasn't ready to explore with relative strangers. "Sounds like a formative experience," he said carefully. "It was. I learned that I was stronger than I thought, that I could solve problems under pressure, that depending on yourself was safer than depending on others." Natalie paused, seeming to realize she'd revealed more than she'd intended. "I also learned that I really hate instant oatmeal." Cal laughed, recognizing the deflection, but respecting her boundaries. "Good thing we brought real food then." As darkness settled over the campsite, and the children's energy finally began to flag, Cal suggested they move to the water's edge to watch for beaver activity. They arranged themselves on a fallen log, with perfect sightlines to the beaver lodges, Jake and Emma flanking the adults with barely contained excitement. The wait required patience, but it was rewarded when a large beaver emerged from one of the lodges and began swimming purposefully toward the shore. Soon, 3 more beavers joined the first, and the families found themselves watching a masterclass in aquatic engineering as the animals worked to repair and expand their dam. "They're so organized," Emma whispered in amazement. "It's like they have a plan for everything." "They do," Cal whispered back. "Beaver families work together on projects that can take years to complete. Each one knows their job, and they all contribute to the family's success." Beside him, Cal felt Natalie shift slightly, and when he glanced at her, he saw that she was watching him rather than the beavers, her expression thoughtful in the moonlight. "What?" he asked quietly. "Nothing," she said, but her smile suggested otherwise. "I was just thinking how nice this is, all of us together, sharing something special." The warmth in her voice, combined with the intimacy of the setting, created a moment that felt charged with possibility. Cal found himself acutely aware of Natalie's presence beside him, the soft scent of her shampoo, the way the firelight played across her features, the easy way she'd settled into this temporary family dynamic. "Dad," Jake's voice cut through. "The moment. Emma's getting sleepy. Should we head back to the tents?" Indeed, Emma was leaning heavily against Natalie's shoulder, fighting to keep her eyes open, despite her obvious fascination with the beaver construction project. "Good idea," Cal said, though he felt reluctant to break the spell of the evening. Back at the campsite, the logistics of putting 2 tired children to bed in an outdoor setting proved more complex than Cal had anticipated. Jake, who'd been camping numerous times, had his routine down to a science, but Emma required more coaxing and reassurance about sleeping in an unfamiliar environment. "What if there are bears?" she asked as Natalie tucked her into her sleeping bag. "Mr. Porter made sure our food is properly stored," Natalie said patiently. And bears around here are much more afraid of us than we are of them. What if I need to go to the bathroom in the middle of the night? Then you wake me up and we'll go together. Remember, we practiced with the flashlight. What if, Emma, Natalie said gently but firmly, remember what we learned about courage. Sometimes being brave means trusting the people who care about you to keep you safe. Cal, who was listening from his position by the fire, felt something twist in his chest at Natalie's words. There was something about the way she'd phrased it, trusting people who care about you, that suggested depths of meaning beyond simple camping reassurance. Once both children were settled, Cal and Natalie found themselves alone by the dying fire, the night air carrying the sounds of forest life and the gentle lapping of lake water against the shore. "Thank you for this," Natalie said softly, "for including us, for teaching Emma so much about the outdoors. This is exactly what she needed." "What about what you needed?" Cal asked, surprising himself with the personal nature of the question. Natalie looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes reflecting the last flames of the campfire. "I needed this too," she admitted, "more than I realized." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, each lost in their own thoughts. Cal found himself fighting the urge to reach for Natalie's hand, to bridge the physical distance between them that seemed so much more significant in the intimacy of the firelight. "Cal," Natalie said suddenly, her voice carrying a note of urgency that made him turn toward her completely. "What is it? I need to tell you something, about my work, about why I can stay in Millbrook so long, about—" She paused, seeming to struggle with how much to reveal. "About who I really am." Cal felt his stomach tighten. Part of him had been expecting this conversation, but another part had been content to let the mystery remain unsolved as long as their relationship continued to deepen. "You don't have to tell me anything you're not ready to share," he said carefully. "But I do," Natalie said, her voice gaining strength, "because this, whatever this is between us, it means something to me. You and Jake mean something to me, and you deserve honesty." Before she could continue, both adults heard the distinctive sound of a helicopter approaching from the south. The noise grew louder quickly, suggesting the aircraft was heading directly for their location. "That's odd," Cal said, standing up to peer through the trees. "There's no helicopter service to this area, and it's too late for routine park service. Flights." The helicopter passed directly overhead, its searchlight briefly illuminating their campsite before it continued toward what sounded like a landing in the large meadow half a mile away. "Probably an emergency," Cal said, though something about the aircraft's purposeful approach to their remote location struck him as unusual. Natalie had gone very still beside the fire, her face pale in the dying light. When Cal looked at her, he saw an expression of what could only be described as dread. "Natalie, what's wrong?" She began, then stopped as her phone, which she'd kept turned off for the entire camping trip, began buzzing insistently from inside her tent. "I have to take this," she said, moving quickly toward her tent, with an urgency that suggested she knew exactly who was calling and why. Cal heard her answer the phone in a voice that was crisp, professional, and completely different from any tone he'd heard her use before. Though he couldn't make out the words, the conversation was clearly intense and appeared to involve a significant amount of decision-making authority on Natalie's part. When she emerged from the tent, 5 minutes later, she looked like a different person. Gone was the relaxed camping companion of the evening. In her place stood a woman who radiated competence, urgency, and barely controlled stress. "I have to go," she said without preamble. "There's been an emergency, and I'm needed immediately." "What kind of emergency?" Cal asked, though he was beginning to suspect that whatever was happening had more to do with Natalie's mysterious work than any personal crisis. "I can't explain right now. The helicopter is here for me, and I have to wake Emma and gather our things." Cal watched in amazement as Natalie efficiently broke down their portion of the campsite with the kind of practiced speed that suggested she'd done this before. Her movements were economical, purposeful, and completely at odds with the woman who'd been hesitantly learning to build campfires just hours earlier. "Natalie," he said, as she shook Emma gently awake. "What's really going on here?" She looked at him over Emma's sleepy head, and for a moment her composed mask slipped, revealing genuine anguish underneath. "I wanted to tell you tonight," she said quietly. "I was going to explain everything, but now, Cal, I'm so sorry. This isn't how I wanted this to happen." how you wanted what to happen. But Natalie was already helping a confused Emma gather her belongings, explaining in soothing tones that they had to leave unexpectedly, but that their camping adventure had been wonderful. Within 20 minutes, they were gone, walking through the forest toward the meadow where the helicopter waited, with rotors spinning. Cal stood in his decimated campsite, Jake sleeping peacefully in his tent, trying to make sense of what had just happened. Whatever Natalie Winslow's story was, it clearly involved the kind of resources and responsibilities that required helicopter evacuations from remote campsites. And whatever she'd been about to tell him by the fire, Cal had the sinking feeling that it was going to change everything he thought he knew about the woman he was falling in love with. Cal spent the drive home from Crystal Lake trying to explain to Jake why Natalie and Emma had left so suddenly, though he wasn't entirely sure he understood it himself. Jake accepted the explanation of a family emergency with the resilience of childhood, but his disappointed questions about when they'd see Emma again hit Cal harder than he'd expected. "Will they come back, Dad?" Jake asked as they pulled into their driveway. "I don't know, buddy," Cal said honestly. "I hope so." The next few days passed in an odd suspension of normalcy. Cal went to work, Jake went to school, and their routine continued unchanged. But there was an Emma and Natalie-shaped hole in their lives that seemed to grow larger rather than smaller with each passing day. Cal found himself checking his phone obsessively for messages that never came, and Jake asked hopefully each afternoon whether their friends had returned. On Thursday afternoon, Jake burst through the front door with unusual excitement, his backpack bouncing as he headed straight for the kitchen table where Cal was paying bills. Dad, you're not going to believe what I found at the library." "What's that, sport?" Jake pulled a magazine from his backpack and slapped it down on the table with the dramatic flair of a prosecutor presenting key evidence. It was a recent issue of Forbes, open to an article titled "Tech's Most Powerful Women, the Visionaries Reshaping Tomorrow." And there, taking up half the page, was a professional photograph of Natalie Winslow. Cal stared at the image, his mind struggling to reconcile the woman in the picture with the person who'd helped Jake build blanket forts and learn to tie knots in his backyard. The Natalie in the magazine wore an elegant business suit and had her hair styled in a sophisticated updo. Her expression was confident, commanding, and completely different from any look he'd seen on her face. "It's her, isn't it?" Jake said, bouncing on his toes with the excitement of discovery. "It's Natalie, but she looks so different." Cal read the caption beneath the photo with growing disbelief. "Natalie Winslow, CEO of Pinnacle Technologies, has revolutionized cloud computing infrastructure while maintaining her company's position as one of the fastest-growing tech firms in Silicon Valley." "Mrs. Henderson helped me find it," Jake continued, oblivious to his father's shock. "I was looking for pictures of Colorado wildlife for my science project, and she showed me how to use the magazine database on the computer. I typed in Natalie just for fun, and there she was." Cal turned the page and found a full article about Natalie's career, complete with details about her company's recent billion-dollar acquisition and her reputation as one of the most innovative leaders in the technology industry. The article mentioned her Stanford MBA, her rise through the corporate ranks, and her success in what the writer called the ruthless world of Silicon Valley venture capitalism. There was also a sidebar about her personal life, or rather, the careful absence of information about her personal life. The article noted that Natalie was notoriously private about her family, with only brief mentions of her daughter and no information about Emma's father. "She's really rich, isn't she, Dad?" Jake said, studying the pictures with fascination. "Like really, really rich." Cal couldn't answer immediately. He was still processing the magnitude of Natalie's deception, trying to understand why a billionaire CEO would spend weeks in Millbrook pretending to be just another single mother on vacation. "Dad, are you okay? You look funny." "I'm fine, buddy," Cal managed. "Just surprised, that's all." But he wasn't fine. He felt like he'd been punched in the stomach, like everything he'd thought he understood about Natalie and their developing relationship had been revealed as an elaborate lie. The woman who'd sat in his kitchen sharing coffee and conversation, who'd helped with homework and learned camping skills, that woman had been an act, a role played by someone whose real life was so far removed from his world that they might as well have been from different planets. Can we call her Jake asked hopefully. "I want to ask her about her company, and maybe Emma would like to know that her mom is famous." "I don't think that's a good idea right now," Cal said, closing the magazine with more force than necessary. "Why not? I bet she'd be excited that we found out her secret." Cal looked at his son's innocent enthusiasm and felt his heart break a little. How could he explain to an 8-year-old that sometimes adults lied, that sometimes people pretended to be someone they weren't, that sometimes the people you trusted most were the ones who hurt you deepest? "Jake, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Cal said, sitting down so they were at eye level. "Sometimes grown-ups have complicated reasons for not telling the whole truth about themselves. Natalie probably had good reasons for not mentioning her job, but it means our friendship with her might be more complicated than we thought." Jake's face fell as he began to understand that his father's reaction wasn't matching his own excitement. "Are you mad at her?" Cal considered the question seriously. Was he mad, hurt, disappointed? All of those emotions were swirling through him, along with a healthy dose of humiliation at how completely he'd been deceived. "I'm not mad," he said finally, though he wasn't entirely sure that was true. "But I am confused about why she didn't tell us the truth." That evening, after Jake had gone to bed, still clutching the Forbes magazine and making plans to show it to Emma when she returned, Cal found himself standing on his back porch with a beer, staring at the mountains and trying to make sense of his feelings. The rational part of his mind understood that Natalie might have had legitimate reasons for keeping her identity secret. Wealthy people, especially those in the public eye, probably dealt with fortune hunters and people who wanted to take advantage of their money. Maybe her deception had been about protecting herself and Emma from exactly the kind of assumptions and complications that wealth could bring to relationships. But the emotional part of him felt betrayed in ways that went deeper than simple dishonesty. He'd shared stories about Sarah, about his fears as a single parent, about his struggles to rebuild his life after loss. He'd trusted Natalie with his vulnerability, and now it seemed like she'd been studying him like a specimen, rather than opening herself to genuine connection. Worse, he'd started to imagine a future that included Natalie and Emma in their lives. He'd pictured family dinners and shared holidays, camping trips and ordinary Tuesday evenings. He'd even begun to think about whether Jake would be okay with him loving someone other than Sarah, whether there was room in their carefully constructed life for the kind of expansion that real partnership would require. Now all of those half-formed dreams felt foolish. The fantasies of a man who'd been naive enough to believe that a billionaire tech CEO would genuinely be interested in building a life with a small-town hardware store employee. His phone buzzed with a text message, and for a moment, Cal's heart jumped with the hope that it might be Natalie, with an explanation that would somehow make everything make sense. Instead, it was Tom Miller, with a reminder about inventory duties for the next day. Cal was just putting his phone away when it buzzed. Again. This time, the message was from an unknown number. "Cal, this is Natalie. I know you probably have questions. Could we talk? I'm back in Millbrook, and I owe you an explanation." Cal stared at the message for a long time. Part of him wanted to ignore it, to protect himself from whatever additional hurt might come from learning more about Natalie's deception. But another part of him, the part that had fallen in love with her laugh and her gentleness with Jake, needed to understand what had really been happening between them. He typed back, "Jake found a magazine article about you today. Forbes. Is any of it true?" The response came quickly. "All of it, and that's exactly what I was afraid of." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that when you found out who I really am, you'd look at me differently. Afraid that everything real between us would be poisoned by assumptions about money and motives and the kind of life I'm supposed to want." Cal read the message twice, trying to pass the layers of meaning. There was something in her phrasing, "who I really am," and "the kind of life I'm supposed to want," that suggested her own relationship with her wealth and status might be more complicated than the magazine article indicated. "The camping trip," he typed. "The helicopter. That was real business, wasn't it?" "A crisis at one of our data centers. I had to authorize emergency protocols that couldn't wait. Cal, I wanted to tell you that night by the fire. I was going to explain everything." Cal believed her about that part. He remembered the urgency in her voice when she'd said she needed to tell him something, the way she'd seemed to be gathering courage for a difficult conversation. "Where are you now?" he typed. Mountain View Lodge, room 247. Emma's asleep. But I've been sitting here for 2 hours, trying to figure out how to explain without making everything worse. Cal looked at his watch. It was just past 9, and Jake was sound asleep. Mrs. Patterson would come over if he asked her to, but the idea of waking his elderly neighbor to cover a late-night confrontation with a woman who'd been lying to him for weeks seemed absurd. "It's late," he typed, "and I need time to think about this. I understand, but Cal, please don't let my mistakes ruin what Emma and Jake have found in each other. Whatever you decide about me, they don't deserve to lose their friendship over my poor choices." That message hit Cal harder than any of the others because it forced him to confront the reality that his hurt and anger weren't just about him. Jake had formed a real bond with Emma, had been counting the days until she returned, had spent the evening planning all the things he wanted to share with her about their camping adventure. "We'll talk tomorrow," Cal typed finally. "After work. Jake doesn't need to be part of this conversation until we figure out what there is to figure out. Thank you, and Cal. For what it's worth, every moment I spent with you and Jake was real. The person I was when I was with you, that's who I actually am when I'm not trying to be who everyone expects me to be." Cal read that final message several times before putting his phone away without responding. He wanted to believe her, wanted to think that the woman who'd helped Jake with homework and learned to build campfires had been genuine rather than an elaborate performance. But trust, once broken, was a fragile thing to repair. And Cal had learned the hard way that when the stakes involved his son's emotional well-being, caution wasn't just wise, it was essential. Tomorrow, he would listen to Natalie's explanations and try to separate the lies from the truth. Tonight, he would sit on his porch and remember what it had felt like to believe that love might be possible again before he'd learned that the woman he was falling for had been playing a role all along. The conversation with Natalie that Friday evening lasted 3 hours and resolved nothing. They met at Rosie's diner after the dinner rush, choosing a corner booth where their voices wouldn't carry to other patrons. Natalie looked exhausted, her usual polished appearance replaced by the rumpled casualness of someone who'd been wrestling with difficult decisions. Cal arrived determined to maintain emotional distance, but the moment he saw her face, drawn with worry and what looked like genuine anguish, his protective instincts kicked in despite his hurt. "Thank you for coming," Natalie said as he slid into the booth across from her. "I wasn't sure you would." "I almost didn't," Cal admitted. "But Jake deserves to understand what's happening, and I can't explain it to him if I don't understand it myself." Natalie nodded, accepting the implicit criticism. "Where do you want me to start? How about with why a billionaire CEO decided to spend a month lying to a hardware store clerk in small-town Colorado?" The bluntness of the question made Natalie flinch, but she met his gaze steadily. "Because I was drowning," she said simply. "Because I hadn't had a real conversation with another adult in months. Because Emma was becoming a stranger to me, and I was becoming someone I didn't recognize to myself." Over the next hour, Natalie painted a picture of her life that was simultaneously privileged and isolating. The constant demands of running a major corporation, the endless stream of people who wanted something from her, the way her wealth had become a barrier between her and authentic human connection. "You have to understand," she said, stirring her untouched coffee with nervous energy. "When you have money like I do, you never know why people are interested in you. Is it genuine affection, or are they calculating what they might gain from the relationship? After a while, you start to assume everyone has an agenda. So you decided to test me by lying about who you were." "No." Natalie's response was sharp enough to draw glances from other patrons. She lowered her voice and continued, more carefully. "Cal, that's not what this was. When Emma got hurt and you helped her, you didn't want anything from me. You wouldn't even let me pay for gas money. Do you have any idea how rare that is in my world?" Cal found himself remembering that first meeting at the hospital, the way Natalie had seemed genuinely surprised by his refusal of payment. At the time, he'd attributed her reaction to the stress of her daughter's injury, but perhaps there had been more to it. "I came to Millbrook to get away from all of that," Natalie continued. "To give Emma a chance to be a normal kid for a few weeks. To see if I could remember who I was before the company consumed my entire identity. The plan was to stay 2 weeks and then go back to San Francisco. What changed?" Natalie's smile was soft and sad. You did. You and Jake. For the first time in years, I met people who liked me for who I was, rather than what I could do for them. Emma was happier than I'd seen her since she was tiny. I felt like I could breathe again. Cal wanted to stay angry, wanted to maintain the protective walls he'd built around his heart over the past few days, but the raw honesty in Natalie's voice was hard to resist, and her explanation had the ring of truth. So you decided to keep lying to us indefinitely. I decided to keep being the person I am when I'm with you, Natalie corrected. The person I was before board meetings and quarterly projections and hostile takeover attempts became my daily reality. The person who likes camping and not tying lessons and helping with homework. But that person doesn't exist without the lie, does she? Cal said quietly. Because the real Natalie Winslow lives in Silicon Valley and runs a billion-dollar company and probably has a dozen people whose job it is to manage her schedule. Natalie was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely above a whisper. I've been thinking about that for the past week, about which version of me is real and which one is the performance. And I keep coming back to the same conclusion, which is that I've never been happier than I was sitting in your kitchen drinking coffee while the kids did homework, that I've never felt more like myself than I did learning to build a fire, or teaching Emma to tie knots, that for the first time in years I remembered what it felt like to be part of something that mattered more than profit margins. Cal felt his resolve wavering. Everything Natalie was saying aligned with his own observations of her behavior over the past weeks. The woman who'd stayed up late helping Jake with a science project, who'd patiently answered Emma's endless questions. About Beaver Engineering, who'd fallen asleep in his chair after a successful sleepover. That woman had seemed genuinely content in ways that were hard to fake. But you still lied to me, he said, though with less venom than before. For weeks, every day, you let me believe you were someone you're not. I let you see who I really am when all the external pressure is stripped away, Natalie said. The CEO thing, the money, the company, those are things I do, not who I am. But you're right that I should have told you sooner. I was going to that night by the campfire, but then the emergency call came and you turned back into the other Natalie, Cal finished. The one who can commandeer helicopters and make billion-dollar decisions. The one who has responsibilities. To 8,000 employees and their families, Natalie said, with a flash of the steel that had probably made her successful in the corporate world. The one who sometimes has to choose between what she wants and what she owes to other people. They sat in silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Cal found himself thinking about his own transformation from firefighter to hardware store clerk, about the ways tragedy and responsibility had forced him to become someone different from who he'd been before. Maybe the distance between Natalie's two selves wasn't so different from his own experience of reinvention. What happens now? He asked finally. I don't know, Natalie admitted. I've been thinking about that too. About whether it's possible to build something real when the foundation is this complicated. What do you want to happen? Natalie looked at him for a long moment, her green eyes reflecting the diner's harsh fluorescent lighting. I want to find a way to be both versions of myself without having to choose between them. I want Emma to have the stable, happy childhood she deserves. And I want to see if what we started building together is strong enough to survive the truth about who I really am. Cal felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of the tight anger that had been his constant companion for the past week. He wasn't ready to trust completely, wasn't prepared to pretend that Natalie's deception hadn't hurt, but he was beginning to understand that the situation might be more complex than simple betrayal. Jake's been asking about Emma every day, he said. Emma's been asking about Jake too, and about you. She wants to know when we can go rock hunting again, and whether you'll teach her how to skip stones. And what do you tell her? The grown-ups sometimes have to work through complicated problems before kids can have the fun parts of friendship. Cal almost smiled at that diplomatic explanation. She accepts that? She's 8. She accepts it for now, but her patience has limits. They left the diner without any resolution beyond an agreement to continue talking. Cal drove home, feeling emotionally drained, but slightly less angry than he'd been that morning. Natalie's explanations hadn't excused her deception, but they'd provided context that made her choices more understandable, if not entirely forgivable. Over the weekend, Cal found himself thinking constantly about their conversation and what it might mean for their future. Jake, meanwhile, continued to ask daily about Emma's return, his disappointment growing more pronounced as the days passed without contact from his new friend. "Dad," Jake said on Sunday morning as they ate breakfast, "did we do something wrong? Is that why Emma and Natalie haven't called?" Cal looked at his son's worried face and felt his heart clench. Whatever he and Natalie ultimately decided about their relationship, Jake didn't deserve to lose his friendship with Emma over adult complications. "No, buddy, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes grown-ups have problems that don't have anything to do with kids, and it takes time to work them out. But they will work them out, right? Emma's my best friend now." Cal wished he could provide the reassurance Jake was looking for, but honesty seemed more important than false comfort. "I hope so, sport. I really hope so." That afternoon, while Jake was playing at a neighbor's house, Cal found himself walking through Millbrook's small downtown, ending up at the park where he and Natalie had taken the children for their first official playdate. He sat on the bench where they talked about parenting and loss, remembering how natural their conversation had felt, how right it had seemed to share the burden of single parenthood with someone who understood its challenges. His phone buzzed with a text message from Natalie. "Emma wants to know if she can call Jake tonight, just to talk about regular 8-year-old things. Would that be okay?" Cal stared at the message for several minutes. Allowing the children to reconnect would signal that he was open to rebuilding their relationship, but it would also raise Jake's hopes about seeing Emma again soon. If things ultimately didn't work out between the adults, Jake would be disappointed all over again. But as he thought about his son's sad questions that morning, Cal realized that protecting Jake from potential future disappointment wasn't worth denying him present happiness. 8 o'clock, he texted back. "Jake will be thrilled." Jake's excitement when Cal told him about the planned phone call was infectious, and Cal found himself smiling genuinely for the first time in days as his son planned topics of conversation and gathered items to show Emma through the phone's camera. That evening, listening to Jake's animated chatter with Emma about school projects and rock collections and plans for future adventures, Cal began to understand that some decisions were bigger than his own hurt feelings. Whatever happened between him and Natalie, their children had formed a bond that deserved protection and nurturing. The question was whether two adults who'd started their relationship with such fundamental dishonesty could find a way to build something lasting and true. Cal wasn't sure he knew the answer, but watching Jake's joy as he talked to his friend, he realized he was willing to try to find out. The real test would come when they had to figure out how to bridge the enormous gap between their two worlds, between his simple life in Millbrook and her complex existence in Silicon Valley. Because unless they could solve that puzzle, all the honesty and good intentions in the world wouldn't be enough to make their relationship work. The call came at 6:23 on Tuesday evening. Just as Cal and Jake were finishing dinner, Chief Morrison's voice on the other end of the line carried the kind of controlled urgency that immediately put Cal's emergency training on high alert. "Cal, we have a missing child situation developing. 10-year-old girl, been gone since about 3 this afternoon. Her mother says she was upset about something and took off from Mountain View Lodge on foot. We've got teams organizing, but with the weather moving in..." Cal looked out his kitchen window at the dark clouds that had been building all afternoon. The forecast called for a significant storm system, with the possibility of early snow at higher elevations. "What's the child's name?" Cal asked, though he had a sick feeling he already knew the answer. "Emma Winslow. Mother says you know the family." Cal felt the blood drain from his face. "I'll be there in 15 minutes. "Dad?" Jake looked up from his homework with concern. "What's wrong?" "Emma's missing," Cal said, already reaching for his jacket and emergency gear. "She wandered off from the lodge this afternoon, and they... can't find her." Jake's eyes went wide with alarm. "Missing? Like lost in the woods missing?" "We don't know yet, buddy, but I'm going to help look for her." Cal paused, his hand on the door handle. "Mrs. Patterson will come stay with you while I'm gone." "Can't I come help? I know all Emma's favorite places." Cal was about to automatically refuse when he realized Jake was right. He did know Emma's favorite places. Over their weeks of friendship, the children had explored much of the area around Millbrook, and Jake might have insights about where Emma would go that the adult search teams would miss. "You can come to the command center," Cal decided, "but you'll stay with the other volunteers, not out on the trails. Deal?" The drive to Mountain View Lodge was tense. With Jake firing questions Cal couldn't answer, and the radio crackling with updates from search teams that had already deployed. By the time they arrived, the lodge's main conference room had been transformed into a search and rescue command center, with maps covering every surface and volunteers checking in for assignments. Cal spotted Natalie immediately. She was standing near the largest map, her face pale and drawn, wearing hiking gear that looked expensive but practical. When she saw Cal and Jake enter, relief flooded her expression. "Cal, thank God you're here," she said, crossing the room quickly. "They say you know these mountains better than anyone." "What happened?" Cal asked, his professional training pushing personal complications aside. "Tell me everything." Natalie's composure cracked slightly as she explained. "We had an argument this morning about going back to California, about her school, about our life there. She's been so happy here, and when I told her we needed to go home next week, she got upset, more upset than I've ever seen her." "What did she say?" "That she didn't want to leave, that Millbrook was her real home now, that she wished she could stay with you and Jake forever." Natalie's voice broke on the last words. "I tried to explain that our life is in California, that my work is there, that we can't just abandon everything we've built. She said she understood why I had to go back, but that she was old enough to make her own choices." Cal could picture the scene. Emma's stubborn determination meeting Natalie's practical concerns in a collision that neither of them had been prepared to handle diplomatically. "Where was she when you last saw her?" "In her room after lunch, supposedly. Reading. When I went to check on her around 3, she was gone. Her jacket is missing and her small hiking pack," and Natalie paused, looking embarrassed. "The rope you taught her to use for knots, she took that too." Jake tugged on Cal's sleeve. "Dad, I know where she went." Cal crouched down to Jake's level. "Where, buddy?" "The secret cave. Remember? The one we found last weekend when we were exploring near Eagle Point. Emma said it was the perfect hideout because you can see the whole valley, but nobody can see you." Cal felt his stomach clench. Eagle Point was a beautiful but challenging hike, involving several stream crossings and some moderately technical terrain. For an experienced adult hiker, it was a pleasant day trip. For a 10-year-old alone, especially with weather moving in, it could be deadly. "How far is Eagle Point?" Chief Morrison asked, overhearing the conversation. "About 4 miles from here." "But it's not an easy 4 miles, Cal said, moving to the topographic map. "See this section here? The trail crosses Cascade Creek 3 times. And with the rain that's been forecast, those crossings could become dangerous quickly. We have teams heading that direction already," Morrison said, "but they're moving slowly because of the terrain." Cal studied the map, his mind automatically calculating distances, terrain difficulties, and the time that had elapsed since Emma's disappearance. "She's been gone for over 3 hours. Even if she took her time and stopped to rest, she could have reached the cave by now." "What's the fastest route to get there?" Natalie asked, her voice tight with controlled panic. Cal traced a path on the map with his finger. "There's a service road that gets you within 1.5 miles of Eagle Point, but it's only accessible by 4-wheel drive. From there, it's a steep hike up, but much faster than the regular trail." "I know that road," one of the other volunteers said. "It's in pretty rough shape after the rain we had last week." "My truck can handle it," Cal said. "Chief, I'd like to take a small team up the service road while the other groups continue on the main trails. If Emma's at the cave, we can reach her faster than anyone else." Morrison nodded. "Take whoever you need. Radio check every 15 minutes. Cal was gathering his gear when Natalie appeared at his side. "I'm coming with you." "Natalie, that's not a good idea. The terrain is going to be challenging and she's my daughter," Natalie said with steel in her voice. "I'm not sitting here while other people look for her." Cal looked at her hiking gear, remembering her competence during their camping trip, and her claims about extensive outdoor experience. "Can you handle a steep, potentially dangerous hike in deteriorating weather?" "I can handle whatever I have to handle to find Emma." "Dad," Jake interrupted, "what about me?" Cal looked at his son's worried face and felt torn. Jake's local knowledge could be valuable, but taking an 8-year-old on what might become a dangerous rescue mission violated every parental instinct he possessed. "You need to stay here, buddy. Help coordinate with the other search teams and be ready to guide them to the right places when we radio back with information." Jake looked disappointed but nodded seriously. "Find her, Dad. Emma's counting on you." 20 minutes later, Cal was navigating his truck up a rutted service road that seemed to grow more treacherous with each passing mile. Natalie sat in the passenger seat, checking their GPS coordinates against the topographic map, while two other volunteers, Tom Miller and a local park ranger named Sarah Chen, occupied the back seats. The weather was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as light drizzle was becoming steady rain, and the temperature was dropping noticeably as they gained elevation. Through the truck's windshield, Cal could see clouds settling over the higher peaks in a way that suggested snow wasn't far behind. "How much farther?" Natalie asked, though her tone suggested she was asking more to fill the silence than because she needed the information. "Another half-mile to where we park, then probably 45 minutes hiking," Cal said. "The trail gets steep pretty quickly once we leave the road." "She's a strong hiker," Natalie said, though Cal could hear the worry she was trying to hide. "And she's smart. If the weather gets bad, she'll find shelter." "The cave is good shelter," Tom offered from the back seat. "If she made it that far, she can wait out a storm." But Cal was thinking about the creek crossings, about how quickly mountain streams could become torrents in heavy rain. Emma was a capable kid, but she was still only 10 years old, alone, and probably scared. Every minute that passed increased the danger she was facing. They reached the end of the service road just as the rain began to come down in earnest. Cal parked the truck and distributed emergency gear, extra flashlights, emergency blankets, first aid supplies, and waterproof communication equipment. "Everyone understand the plan?" he asked as they prepared to leave the relative safety of the vehicle. "We stick together. We radio our position every 15 minutes, and if anyone gets into trouble, we stop immediately to help. Emma's safety is important, but we can't help her if we become casualties ourselves." The hike began deceptively easily, following a well-maintained trail through dense forest. But within 20 minutes, they reached the first steep section, where the path switched back and forth up a rocky slope that was becoming increasingly slippery in the rain. Complaint, despite the worsening conditions. Whatever her background with outdoor activities, she clearly had the skills to back up her claims. They were about halfway to Eagle Point when Sarah Chen's radio crackled with an update from the command. "Center, Search Team Alpha, this is base. We've had contact with one of our other teams. They found signs that the missing child crossed Cascade Creek at the lower ford approximately 2 hours ago. Footprints heading uphill toward your location." Cal felt a mixture of relief and renewed urgency. Emma had made it across the creek safely, which meant she was probably at the cave, but it also meant she was definitely alone on the mountain as the weather continued to deteriorate. "Base, this is Team Alpha," Cal radioed back. "We copy the update. Estimate 20 more minutes to the cave location. We'll radio when we have visual confirmation." The final approach to Eagle Point was the most challenging yet. The trail disappeared entirely in places, requiring them to navigate by landmarks and GPS coordinates across terrain that was becoming treacherous in the rain. Cal found himself thinking about Emma making this same climb alone, and his admiration for her courage was tempered by fear for her safety. "There," Natalie said suddenly, pointing ahead through the rain and mist. "I can see the rock formation Jake described." Indeed, the distinctive granite outcropping that marked Eagle Point was visible through the trees, along with the dark opening of the cave where Emma had apparently taken shelter. "Emma!" Natalie called out, her voice carrying clearly in the mountain air. "Emma, it's Mom! We're here!" They waited for a response that didn't come. Cal felt a chill that had nothing to do with the dropping temperature. "She should have heard that," he said quietly. They covered the final 100 yards to the cave entrance quickly, calling Emma's name repeatedly. But when they reached the shelter where Emma should have been waiting, they found only silence and the cold reality that their search was far from over. The cave held evidence that Emma had been there: a granola bar wrapper, the distinctive pattern of her hiking boot prints in the sandy floor, and most tellingly, several pieces of rope arranged in the knots Cal had taught her. But Emma herself was nowhere to be found. "She was here," Natalie said, kneeling to examine the rope configurations. "These are the knots you showed her, but why would she leave?" Cal was studying the cave entrance, his trained eye reading the story the signs told. "Look at the way the rope is arranged. It's not random. She tied it to this rock outcropping like she was rappelling down." Tom Miller joined him at the cave mouth, peering over the edge into the mist and rain. "That's a 30-foot drop at least. Why would a 10-year-old try to climb down there?" Cal's stomach clenched as he realized what might have happened. The storm. She came here for shelter, but when the rain started getting heavy, she might have seen water rising in the valley below and decided to try to get down to lower ground. Or she heard us calling and tried to climb down to meet us, Sarah Chen added grimly. The implication hung in the air like a physical weight. If Emma had attempted to rappel down the cliff face using the techniques Cal had taught her, and something had gone wrong. "Base, this is Team Alpha," Cal radioed with forced calm. "We found evidence that the subject was at the cave location, but is no longer there. We need additional teams to search the base of Eagle Point cliff face immediately. Copy, Team Alpha. How do you want to proceed?" Cal looked at the steep, slippery descent that would be required to reach the bottom of the cliff. In good weather, it would be challenging but manageable for experienced hikers. In the current conditions, it was bordering on dangerous. "We're going down," he said. "Send backup teams with technical rescue gear to our location as soon as possible." "Cal," Natalie said quietly. "If she fell—" "We don't know that she fell," Cal interrupted, though his own thoughts were running in the same dark direction. "She's smart, she's resourceful, and we taught her well. Let's assume she made it down safely and is looking for shelter." The descent was treacherous. They moved in single file, with Cal leading and constantly testing handholds and footholds for stability. The rain had made every surface slippery, and loose rocks threatened to send them tumbling with each step. Halfway down, Tom Miller's foot slipped on a wet ledge, and only Sarah Chen's quick reflexes prevented him from falling. "Maybe I should wait here," he suggested, breathing hard from the adrenaline spike. "Good idea," Cal agreed. "Stay here and guide the backup teams when they arrive." Cal and Natalie continued alone, their progress slowing as the terrain became more challenging. Cal found himself acutely aware of Natalie beside him, noting her careful movements and steady nerves, despite what had to be overwhelming fear for her daughter. "Natalie," he said during a brief rest on a small ledge, "I want you to know that whatever happens down there, whatever we find, you've been a good mother to Emma, the best." "Don't," Natalie said sharply. "Don't talk like we're going to find something terrible." "I'm not giving up hope," Cal said. "But I've done enough search and rescue to know that we need to be prepared for—" "No!" Natalie's voice was steel. "Emma is alive. She's waiting for us to find her, and we're going to bring her home safe. That's the only outcome I'm willing to accept." Cal looked at her rain-soaked face, at the fierce determination in her green eyes, and felt something shift in his chest. This was the real Natalie Winslow. Not the polished CEO or the careful woman playing at normal life, but a mother who would move mountains to protect her child. They reached the bottom of the cliff as the rain began to turn to sleet, making their search even more urgent. The base of Eagle Point was a tumbled maze of boulders and fallen trees, with numerous hiding places where an injured child might take shelter. "Emma!" Natalie called, her voice echoing off the rock walls. "Emma, we're here! It's Mom and Cal!" They spread out to search systematically, checking every crevice and overhang large enough to shelter a 10-year-old. Cal's flashlight beam swept across wet stone and dripping vegetation, looking for any sign of Emma's presence. It was Natalie who found her. "Cal, over here! I found her!" Cal crashed through the underbrush toward Natalie's voice, arriving to find Emma huddled in a small cave formed by 3 large boulders. The girl was conscious but clearly in pain, her right ankle swollen and her hiking clothes soaked through. "Emma!" Natalie was already beside her daughter, pulling off her own jacket to wrap around the shivering child. "Sweetheart, are you okay?" "Mom." Emma's voice was weak but alert. "I'm sorry I ran away. I got scared when the rain started and I tried to climb down like Cal taught me, but I slipped and hurt my ankle." Cal knelt beside them, his hands automatically beginning the assessment patterns he'd learned years ago. Emma's ankle was definitely injured, possibly broken, but she was alert, responsive, and didn't appear to have any other serious trauma. "You did good, Emma," he said, checking her pulse and breathing. "You found shelter, you stayed calm, and you waited for help. That's exactly what you were supposed to do. Is Jake okay? He must be worried about me." "Jake's fine," Cal assured her. "He's back at the lodge helping coordinate the search. He's the one who figured out where you'd gone." Cal quickly radioed their location to the command center, while Natalie worked to warm Emma with body heat and emergency blankets. The response was immediate. Backup teams with technical rescue equipment were already en route, and a helicopter evacuation was being prepared despite the challenging weather conditions. "We're going to get you out of here," Cal told Emma, "but it might take a little while because of the rain. Can you be brave for a little longer?" "I can be brave," Emma said, though her teeth were chattering from cold and shock. "But Cal, I'm really sorry I caused so much trouble. I know everyone must be worried, and it's all my fault." Cal felt his throat tighten at the guilt in her voice. "Emma, look at me. This is not your fault. You were upset. You made a decision that seemed right. At the time, and when things got difficult, you handled them exactly right. That's what real courage looks like." While they waited for the rescue teams, Cal found himself watching Natalie with Emma. The way she held her daughter, the soft reassurances she murmured, the competent way she assisted with Emma's care. Everything about her behavior spoke to a depth of love and commitment that made Cal's earlier doubts seem petty and small. "Natalie," he said quietly, while Emma dozed against her mother's shoulder, "there's something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I've been thinking about our conversation at the diner, about everything that's happened between us, and watching you today, seeing how you handled this crisis." Cal paused, struggling to find the right words. "I was wrong to let my hurt feelings matter more than what we were building together." Natalie looked at him with surprise. "Cal, let me finish," he said. "You made mistakes by not telling me the truth about your background. But I made mistakes too, by assuming the worst about your motives instead of trusting what I could see with my own eyes. The woman who's been helping Jake with homework, who learned to build campfires, who just climbed down a cliff in a storm to find her daughter. That woman is real, regardless of what her bank account looks like." Tears mixed with rainwater on Natalie's face. "I was so afraid you decided I wasn't worth the complications." "The only thing I've decided," Cal said, "is that some complications are worth fighting through, if you're willing to try." Before Natalie could respond, the sound of approaching rescue teams echoed through the canyon. Within minutes, they were surrounded by emergency personnel with specialized equipment for moving Emma safely up the cliff face. The evacuation was technically complex, but ultimately successful. Emma was secured in a rescue litter and carefully lifted to the top of Eagle Point, with Cal and Natalie following under the guidance of the technical rescue team. By the time they reached the vehicles, the sleet had turned to snow, validating Cal's earlier concerns about the weather. At Millbrook General Hospital, X-rays confirmed that Emma had fractured her ankle, but had no other significant injuries. As the emergency room staff worked to set and cast the brake, Cal called Jake to let him know that Emma had been found safe. "She's really okay?" Jake asked, his relief evident even over the phone. "She's really okay, buddy. Hurt her ankle, but she's going to be fine. They'll probably release her tomorrow. Can I see her?" Cal looked at Natalie, who nodded immediately. "We'll pick you up in an hour. Emma's been asking about you too." After the medical excitement died down and Emma was settled in a hospital room with her new cast, Cal found himself alone with Natalie in the family waiting area. The adrenaline was wearing off, leaving both of them exhausted but oddly energized by the successful rescue. "Thank you," Natalie said simply, "for everything. Today, for knowing where to look, for getting us down that cliff, for not giving up on us." "Thank you for being exactly who I needed you to be when it mattered most," Cal replied. "I've never seen anyone more determined or brave than you were today." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both processing the events of the day and what they might mean for their future. "So what happens now?" Natalie asked finally. "Emma and I are supposed to fly back to California next week. My company is expecting me, and Emma has school." Cal took her hand, intertwining their fingers in a gesture that felt both natural and momentous. "What do you want to happen?" "I want to find a way to make this work," Natalie said without hesitation. "I want Emma to be able to grow up with Jake as her best friend. I want to wake up in a place where people care about each other instead of just what they can gain from each other. I want to build something real with someone who sees me for who I actually am." "Those sound like good wants," Cal said, squeezing her hand. "Now we just have to figure out how to make them reality." As if summoned by their conversation about the future, Jake appeared in the doorway with Mrs. Patterson, his face lighting up when he saw the adults holding hands. "Does this mean Emma gets to stay?" he asked hopefully. Cal and Natalie looked at each other and smiled. "We're working on it, buddy," Cal said. "We're definitely working on it." 6 months later, Cal stood on the back porch of their new house, watching the sunrise paint the mountains in shades of gold and rose. The coffee in his mug steamed in the crisp morning air, and from inside the house came the familiar sounds of a family beginning their day. Jake's voice explaining something with 8-year-old authority, Emma's laughter in response, and Natalie's gentle guidance as she helped both children prepare for school. The house they'd chosen together sat on 5 acres just outside Millbrook, close enough to town for easy access to schools and Cal's new job as Millbrook's fire chief, but far enough out to provide the privacy that Natalie's business required. It was larger than Cal's rental, but smaller than the mansion Natalie could have afforded. A compromise that reflected their shared desire to build something that belonged to both of their worlds, without being dominated by either. "Dad!" Jake's voice called from the kitchen. "Emma can't find her math homework, and she thinks she left it in your truck." Cal smiled, marveling at how naturally Jake had adapted to having a sister and a stepmother-to-be. The transition hadn't been without challenges. There had been adjustment periods, negotiation over house rules, and the inevitable growing pains of blending 2 different family cultures. But watching Jake help Emma search for homework with the patient determination of an older brother, Cal knew they'd made the right choice. "Check the front seat pocket," he called back. "That's where missing homework usually hides." The solution to their geographic dilemma had been more elegant than either of them had dared hope. Natalie's decision to relocate Pinnacle Technologies' headquarters to Denver had shocked the Silicon Valley business community, but proved brilliantly strategic for the company. The move had allowed them to tap into Colorado's growing tech talent pool while dramatically reducing operational costs, and Natalie's leadership during the transition had only enhanced her reputation as an innovative CEO. More importantly, for their family, the relocation meant that Natalie could maintain her professional responsibilities while building the life she'd discovered she wanted in Colorado. She worked from a home office 3 days a week and commuted to Denver twice a week, a schedule that provided the flexibility both her business and her family needed. Cal's return to emergency services had been equally satisfying. When Millbrook's aging fire chief announced his retirement, the town council had offered Cal the position with the kind of enthusiasm that made it clear his reputation had preceded him. The job allowed him to use his skills and experience while staying close to home, and it came with the respect and sense of purpose he'd missed during his hardware store years. "Found it!" Emma's triumphant voice drifted from the house, followed by Jake's satisfied declaration that he'd known it would be in the truck all along. Cal finished his coffee and headed inside to find organized chaos in the kitchen. Natalie stood at the counter packing lunches with the efficiency of someone who'd mastered the morning routine, while Jake and Emma gathered their school supplies with the kind of sibling cooperation that had taken months to develop. "Morning, beautiful," Cal said, dropping a kiss on Natalie's temple as he passed. "Morning yourself, Fire Chief Porter," she replied with a smile that still had the power to make his chest tighten with gratitude for the unexpected turns life could take. The title still felt new enough to make Cal smile. Yesterday had marked his first full month in the position, and he was gradually settling into the administrative responsibilities that came with leadership, while still maintaining the hands-on involvement he'd always loved about emergency work. "Are you still planning to come to the school presentation today?" Emma asked, adjusting the straps of her backpack with the careful attention to detail she'd inherited from her mother. "Wouldn't miss it," Cal assured her. Emma's class was presenting their community helpers project, and she'd chosen to focus on search and rescue operations, a subject she could speak about with the authority of personal experience. "And you'll wear your uniform," Jake added hopefully. His pride in Cal's new position was evident in the way he'd told everyone at school about his dad's promotion to fire chief. "If that's what you want, absolutely." The morning routine continued, with the comfortable efficiency of established family patterns. Backpacks were checked, permission slips were signed, and the eternal question of whether everyone had everything they needed was resolved with the kind of systematic attention that came from practice. As Cal prepared to drive the children to school, Natalie pulled him aside for a brief private conversation. "The board meeting went well yesterday," she said, though something in her tone suggested more complexity than simple good news. What aren't you telling me? Cal asked, recognizing the careful way she was approaching the subject. They've offered me the opportunity to expand internationally. New offices in London and Tokyo, partnerships with some of the biggest tech companies in the world. Natalie paused, studying his face for his reaction. It would mean more travel, more responsibility, and definitely more complexity in our life here. Cal felt a familiar tightness in his chest, the old fear that their two worlds might ultimately prove incompatible despite all their efforts to bridge them. What did you tell them? That I needed to discuss it with my family before making any major decisions, Natalie said with a smile that suggested she was pleased with his reaction to being included in that category. This is our life now, not just my career. We make these choices together. What do you want to do? Natalie was quiet for a moment, and Cal could see her weighing possibilities and consequences in the way she approached all important decisions. A year ago, I would have said yes immediately. The opportunity, the challenge, the validation, it would have been irresistible. And now? Now I wake up every morning in a house full of people I love, in a place where I can breathe, doing work that matters but doesn't consume my entire identity. Natalie reached up to straighten Cal's collar, a gesture that had become habitual and intimate. Now I understand the difference between success and fulfillment. So that's a no to international expansion. That's a let's talk about whether there's a way to do it that doesn't sacrifice what we've built here, Natalie corrected. Maybe there's a middle path that none of us have thought of yet. Cal kissed her forehead, marveling again at her ability to find creative solutions to seemingly impossible problems. We'll figure it out, we always do. The school drop-off was accomplished with the usual mix of last-minute reminders and enthusiastic plans for after-school activities. Jake and Emma had developed the kind of easy friendship that made them natural allies in everything from homework negotiations to weekend adventure planning. And watching them walk into school together never failed to make Cal grateful for the chain of events that had brought their families together. On the drive back home, Cal found himself thinking about the changes the past 6 months had brought to all their lives. Jake had blossomed into a confident, outgoing child whose natural leadership abilities were finally finding outlets in school projects and friendships. Emma had traded her expensive private school for Millbrook Elementary's more personal environment, and the change had brought out an adventurous spirit that had been suppressed by the pressure to excel in academic competition. And Natalie had found ways to be both the successful businesswoman she'd always been and the hands-on mother she'd always wanted to be, without sacrificing either identity to maintain the other. Back at the house, Cal and Natalie settled into their respective home offices for the morning work routine. Cal's position as fire chief required significant administrative time, budget planning, personnel management, and coordination with other emergency services. But it also allowed him the flexibility to work from home when he wasn't needed at the station. Through his office window, he could see Natalie in her own workspace, animated in conversation with someone on her computer screen, her expression carrying the focused intensity he'd learned to associate with complex business negotiations. Even after months of living together, he was still occasionally amazed by her professional competence and the casual way she wielded authority over multi-million-dollar decisions. At noon, they met in the kitchen for lunch and the daily check-in that had become an important part of their relationship maintenance. "How's your morning going?" Natalie asked, settling into the chair across from him with a sandwich and a stack of papers that suggested her own morning had been productive. "Good. We're finalizing the budget proposal for new equipment, and I think the town council is going to approve the expanded training program." Cal paused, watching her sort through what appeared to be contract documents. "How about you? Conquering any new markets today?" "Actually, yes," Natalie said with a grin. "Remember the project I mentioned last week? The one about developing emergency communication systems for rural areas? We just got approval to begin the pilot program." Cal raised an eyebrow. This was the first he'd heard about emergency communication systems, though Natalie had been hinting for weeks about a new project that she thought he'd find particularly interesting. Emergency communications. "Think about what happened when Emma went missing," Natalie explained, her excitement building as she described the concept. The coordination between search teams, the need for reliable communication in remote areas, the way technology could improve response times and safety for both victims and rescuers. Cal began to understand why she'd thought he'd be interested. You're developing technology for search and rescue operations. We're developing technology for all kinds of emergency response, but search and rescue is definitely a priority. And we want to test it right here in Colorado, with local emergency services as our partners in the development process. The implications were significant, both professionally and personally. If Natalie's company became a major provider of emergency communication technology, and if Cal's department was involved in the development and testing process, their two career paths would become aligned in ways that could benefit both their professional goals and their family life. You've been thinking about this for a while, haven't you? Cal asked. Since the night we brought Emma down from Eagle Point, Natalie admitted. Watching how the rescue teams coordinated, seeing the challenges they faced with communication and weather, I kept thinking about how technology could make those operations safer and more efficient. And it doesn't hurt that developing the technology here would give you reasons to stay close to home. It doesn't hurt at all, Natalie agreed, with a smile that suggested she was pleased he'd recognized the personal motivations behind her business decision. They were interrupted by Cal's radio crackling with a call about a minor traffic accident that required fire department response. As he prepared to leave for what would probably be a routine call, Natalie caught his arm. Cal, about the international expansion opportunity? Yeah, I think I know what I want to tell the board. What's that? That Pinnacle Technologies is going to become the premier provider of emergency communication systems in North America before we worry about conquering the rest of the world. That sometimes the biggest opportunities are the ones in your own backyard. Cal kissed her goodbye with the satisfaction of knowing that they'd found another way to build a future that honored both their ambitions and their love for each other. That evening, after Emma's successful school presentation and a family dinner that included heated debates about weekend camping plans, Cal found himself back on the porch with his evening coffee, watching the sun set behind the mountains that had become their shared home. Natalie joined him, settling into the chair beside his with the comfortable ease of established routine. Good. A day? She asked. Very good day, Cal confirmed. You, the best. Natalie reached over to take his hand, a gesture that still carried the same warmth it had 6 months earlier in the hospital waiting room. Cal? I love our life. Cal squeezed her hand, thinking about the simple complexity of that statement. Their life together was built on a foundation of honesty and compromise, shaped by the needs of two children who'd found in each other, the siblings they'd never had, and strengthened by daily choices to put their family's well-being ahead of individual ambitions. It wasn't the life either of them had planned, but it was exactly the life both of them had needed. I love our life too, he said, pulling her close as the first stars appeared over the Colorado mountains. All of it. From inside the house came the sound of Jake and Emma debating the merits of different camping destinations, their voices carrying the easy familiarity of siblings who'd grown up together rather than children who'd met just months before. It was the sound of family in all its complicated, imperfect, absolutely essential glory. And as Cal and Natalie sat together in the gathering darkness, planning their shared future and listening to their children plan adventures, neither of them could imagine wanting to be anywhere else.